It's 5 a.m. on a Thursday in Lower Manhattan. The year, 2016. The line starts at the corner of Lafayette and Prince. It stretches half a block, then turns. The block is filled with people who look like they haven't slept. People who probably have been waiting all night. By 12 p.m., this line will vanish, and so will everything inside. The store will have been open for exactly 1 hour. What they are waiting for isn't a new piece of tech. It isn't a giveaway, and it's definitely not Black Friday. It's a Thursday. It's always been a Thursday, and every Thursday, a brand releases a small, limited collection of apparel and accessories that will sell out in minutes, then reappear on a resale market at 2, 4, sometimes upward of 10x the retail price. The brand doesn't advertise. It doesn't chase you. It doesn't beg. It doesn't need to. In fact, the less it sells, the more powerful it becomes. This is the architecture of a very specific kind of desire, one that took decades to build, one that a private equity firm tried and paid $2 billion to own, and one that the industry still hasn't figured out how to replicate. This is the Supreme story. James Jebbia didn't set out to build a brand. He set out to build a skate shop. The year is 1994. Jebbia signed a lease on a 1,500 square foot space on Lafayette Street in Soho. This was a neighborhood that was still raw enough to matter and still cheap enough to take a risk on. He had already worked retail. He'd co-founded Union, one of New York's first streetwear stores. He understood the culture, but more importantly, he understood the kids inside it. The store he created was strange by any retail logic. The racks were pushed to the walls. The center of the floor was left deliberately empty so skaters could roll in off the street without knocking into a display. You weren't a customer walking into a store. You were a kid walking into a spot. That distinction would end up being worth billions. But in 1994, it was worth nothing. It was just a decision. Supreme's early customers weren't fashion people. They were the kids skating Lafayette and surrounding blocks. A downtown New York scene that was young, broke, and deeply suspicious of anything that smelled like commerce. Jebbia wasn't selling to them. He was one of them, or close enough that the difference didn't show. That authenticity, not the manufactured stuff companies claim to have today, became the foundation everything else was built on. Because here's the thing about Supreme's origin that gets lost in the mythology. There was no master plan, no brand strategist, no focus group, just a guy who knew community. Built a room they wanted to be in, and sold them things they actually wanted to wear. The empire came later. First, there was just the shop. Here's something that should not work. You make less product than people want. You refuse to restock it. You open one store, then a handful more, but never enough. You don't run sales, you don't do promotions, you release everything on the same day of the same week every week like a ritual. Then you watch as the thing you sold for $60 appears online just an hour later for $300. By every conventional retail principle, this is a failure state. You're leaving money on the table, you're turning away customers, you're manufacturing frustration and calling it a product. Except this isn't a failure state, it's the entire strategy. Supreme's limited collection drop model wasn't invented by a consultant. It evolved out of necessity and instinct. Jebbia didn't have the capital to flood the market, so he didn't. He made what he could, sold it fast, and moved on. Scarcity in the beginning was just the reality of owning a small business. But then something interesting happened. The scarcity itself became the product. When you can't have something, you want it more. That's not marketing insight, it's just human psychology. But Supreme was one of the first brands to build an entire business model around that single, uncomfortable truth. The box logo tee wasn't valuable because of the cotton. It wasn't valuable because of the print. It was valuable because not everyone could have it, and everyone knew it. The store reinforced this at every level. Limited SKUs, no restocks, a staff that was famously almost aggressive, indifferent to whether you bought anything or not. You weren't being courted, you were being tested. And that friction, that deliberate, designed resistance, did something counterintuitive. It made people want it more. Most brands spend millions trying to lower the barrier to purchase. Supreme raised it, and in doing so, turned a box logo on a white tee into one of the most recognizable status symbols of the last 30 years. Not bad for a little skate shop. At some point starting in the late 90s, Supreme stopped being a skate shop that made clothing and became something harder to define. It didn't happen with a press release. It happened slowly with more and more releases. Supreme had started collaborating with artists on its apparel, not as a licensing deal, not as a corporate partnership, but as genuine creative choices. Rammellzee, Futura, Cause, images pulled from the same downtown New York world the brand had always lived inside. The tee wasn't just merchandise, it was a position. It said, "We know who this is. Do you?" That question, "Do you know?" became the engine of Supreme's cultural power. The collaborations that followed operated on the same logic, just at different scales. A Nike SB Dunk with the Supreme box logo, a North Face jacket with the red and white tag, each one a limited object that functions less like a product and more like a membership card. Proof that you were paying attention, that you had been there all along, enough to understand the reference. Then came Louis Vuitton. In 2017, Supreme and Louis Vuitton announced a collaboration that stopped the fashion world mid-sentence. It was an unlikely pairing at best, a 160-year-old French luxury house and a downtown skate brand. And it was exactly right. Louis Vuitton got youth and edge and cultural urgency. Supreme got legitimacy in rooms it had always pretended not to care about. The collection sold out instantly. The pieces resold for multiples of their already significant retail prices. But something else happened too. The collaboration announced to the world, definitely and loudly, that Supreme was no longer a secret. It was an institution. The kids on Lafayette Street in 1994 would barely recognize it. Whether that's a betrayal or an evolution depends on who you ask. What's undeniable is this: Supreme has done something almost no brand manages to do. It moved from a subculture to a culture without losing the thing that made the subculture want it in the first place, at least for a little while longer. In 2017, the Carlyle Group, one of the largest private equity firms on the planet, bought a 50% stake in Supreme for approximately $500 million. 3 years later, VF Corp, the conglomerate behind Vans, The North Face, and Timberland, acquired Supreme outright for $2.1 billion. What exactly did they buy? Because Supreme's value was never in its inventory. It wasn't in its real estate. What they bought was the architecture of the desire, the drop model, the cultural credibility, the line outside the store at 5 a.m. And those things are almost impossible to own. You can buy the box logo, you can buy the leases and the Thursday release calendar. What you cannot buy is the reason people cared in the first place. In 2024, VF Corp spun Supreme off at a valuation reportedly well below what they paid. Some might say this was bound to happen. The logical conclusion of taking a company built on indifference to the world, who answered only to its community, and wrapping it up in a corporate structure, who in turn had to answer to a boardroom of investors. There's a moment in every subculture's life cycle when the mainstream notices it. It doesn't announce itself, it just arrives. Quietly at first, and then all at once. A celebrity wears a thing, a magazine runs the story, the wrong people start showing up to the right place, and the people who were there first feel it before they can name it. For Supreme, that moment had been creeping up for years. But if you had to pick a date, a single point of no return, most people who were paying attention would point to 2017, the Louis Vuitton collab, the Carlyle acquisition. Two things that happened in the same year, sending the same signal. Supreme had arrived somewhere it had spent 20 years pretending it didn't want to go. The irony is that the collab was, by every measurable standard, a triumph. The collection was genuinely good. The cultural conversation it generated was enormous, and the resale market went into orbit. But triumph and preservation are different things, because Supreme's power had always lived in a very specific tension, between accessibility and exclusivity, between being known and being unknowable. The brand was famous enough to be coveted, but underground enough that buying felt like an initiation. Once the New York Times style section and every streetwear account on Instagram had dissected every piece of the Louis Vuitton collection in real time, that tension collapsed. Everyone knew it. And when everyone knows, the knowing stops meaning anything. This is the paradox at the heart of every cult brand that survives long enough to become a mainstream brand. Growth is the goal, and growth is the threat. Scale the drop model, and you dilute it. Open more stores, and you spread the mythology too thin. Chase the wrong crowd, and you lose that aesthetic you spent so long to get. Now, I don't think anyone in the world would tell you that Supreme is dead, but it's not crazy to say they are different. So what does Supreme actually sell? Not clothes, not accessories, not even streetwear really. That world is too small for what Supreme became and too broad for what it started as. What Supreme sells is the feeling of being on the right side of an invisible line. Every brand in the world is trying to sell you something. Most of them are transparent about it, the billboards, the influencers. Supreme never did any of that. Instead, it built a line, literally, physically, a line outside a store on Lafayette Street, and made getting to the other side of it feel like a real achievement. That's not retail, that's psychology. And here's what makes the Supreme story more than just a brand story. Every luxury house on the planet has spent the last decade trying to reverse engineer what Supreme figured out by accident in 1994. The drops, the scarcity, the deliberate friction. Hermes has been doing it for a century with Birkin. Nike does it with Jordan releases, but Supreme did it with a $30 tee and a red box in a skate shop for kids who couldn't afford luxury and didn't want it anyways. That's the part nobody has replicated, not the model, the sincerity behind it. Because the drop model only works when people believe you mean it. The moment it feels calculated, the moment the scarcity feels manufactured rather than genuine, the line outside the door starts to mean something different. Supreme built something real, then the world noticed it, and that's the oldest tension in culture there is. You see, that little store down on Lafayette Street was built on something special. And even though it might not be the same, its mark will forever live on in the industry it helped to build. Hey guys, before you head out, I'm a brand new creator on YouTube focused on telling stories about institutions that changed culture. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, comment down below why not. I'm trying to post every Thursday at 2 p.m. and have a lot more interesting videos coming out. Thank you for your time and have a good day.